So a warm welcome to all of you. We're really pleased to see you and think it's very exciting to have people from all over the Nordic countries and Brussels and the EU as well. We're really happy for that. We've been looking very much forward, all of us who have been collaborating in this Nordic sustainable construction. This is really our closing of for some more or less 4 years of hard work on how to minimize the climate and environmental impact from construction. So we're very happy to be here, and my name is Helle Redder Momsen, to those of you who don't know me, and I'm the head of secretariat of this Nordic Sustainable Construction. So this is a collaboration between the Nordic countries and some think tanks and organizations who try together to do what we can to find new ways of accelerating our green transition in the construction sector. This is what we will be doing this afternoon here in this beautiful room. You arrived, and those still arriving, please come in, Henriette. I'm doing the welcome now, and we'll actually have a few words from Trine, who's waiting for me, on this really nice Nordic house that we're in. Then Dan will tell us a bit about the Nordic vision and why we're working together. And then we have Sols with us, who will tell us a bit about some of the headlines in the European new Commission, and also some of the things that his think tank is working on in Brussels. And then we have a break, and in the break, we'd like you to move towards this area, because this area is more for the networking party later. But we wanted the daylight to come in, so we didn't close off. But this is where we go for a coffee and a break. And please take this quite unique opportunity to meet each other, talk with each other, and exchange. We put a little something on these nice pillars. It's from one of our sister programs who made this, and it can maybe inspire you to what to talk about. But I'm sure you also have good ideas yourself. But just to give you a little nudging. So please try to meet someone new. I hope you will all aim for that today and exchange the knowledge we have. We have a lot of really nice knowledge here today, and thank you so much for coming and taking time to prioritize that. December is never boring, also not for any of us here, I'm sure. So we really appreciate that you have taken the time to come. So there's more breaks. We took time for breaks. Then all those work packages, we call it, so the summary of the program will present like the key results from the last 3 years of work. It's also what's somehow gathered in the report that's on your chairs, which you're welcome to take. And then there will be some QR questions. And then there's a short break again, and then we have Sike, who will tell us about the wicked problems and how to solve it. So hopefully it will give us some new inspiration that we can take into our work, because there's many things that needs to be done, but it's always good, I think, to have an open ear and learn something new. Then we have an utopia for building industry of preservation. So it's Clara who will come and tell us a bit about her and some of her colleagues' view on what the construction sector need to do to transform. I think it'll be quite interesting. And then we launch the reports that you're sitting on, hopefully not, but have on your head on your chairs. And then we will actually open up for what the future might bring for Nordic collaboration. So that's a cliffhanger to keep you here. And then there's networking and a glass of nice wine that we will be serving over here. So this is the day. Are you up for it? Nodded. Thank you very much. Okay, with these words, I would like to invite Trine to the stage. Please give her a round of applause. It's okay.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Copenhagen. Welcome to Nordatlantens Brygge, the North Atlantic house that we're in right now. I want to tell you a little bit about this building and where you are. As you may have noticed, it's an old house, and old houses, like old people, they have a lot of stories. This house, it originated as a thought in the mind of a man called Andreas Bjørn in 1735. he looked around at this area of Christianshavn, and at that point it was a muddy swamp, but somehow he imagined this would be the perfect place for a ship ward. And he got this permission from the king, and he secured the trade with Greenland and the Faroe Islands and Iceland. And this became this 7,000 square meters big warehouse that we're in today. It's 6 stories high. Right now we're on the 5th floor, and it's 80 meters long. Yeah, it's an old warehouse that was used to store the stuff from the Faroe Islands and Iceland and Greenland. It was everything from tooth to skin and whale oil. And when we decided, I was not part of the decision, I have to admit, but when Vigdis Finnbogadóttir, amongst others, you know, the Icelandic president of the past, she is the protector of the house, and she had this vision that this house should be turned into a cultural site to remember the story that we share with these North Atlantic countries. And it opened in November 2003. And when they renovated the building, they found all kinds of old stuff from when it was built in 1767. Old pieces of shoes and porcelain. So yeah, it's an old building, and I hope you will enjoy your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trine, for that nice introduction to our place. We thought it was the perfect place for the Nordics to meet. And now I would like to ask Dan Cuivolasco, who is the head of Department of Growth and Climate at the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Council, to please come on stage and share with us your words. Please, Dan, give him a round of applause when you come. It's fine.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So from the Nordic Council of Ministers and Department for Growth and Climate, we are working with the sectors of energy, business affairs, regional affairs, financial policy, digitalization, and environment and climate. So 6 different ministerial councils on our department. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Nordic Vision 2030 here with you today. Before that, I go into the Vision 2030. I will talk a little bit about common Nordic perspectives and the background for politics. That is the culture that comes before politics. But let me start out with where we are, and that is probably known to most of you. But if the Nordics count together, we would be the 12th largest economy in the world and by far the cleanest economy. And the way we think, our values here in the Nordics are fairly similar, even our identities and the long going tradition for collaborating within the Nordics. The Nordic Council of Ministers has existed already since 1971, and the cooperation, of course, much longer. This long-lasting tradition of collaboration puts us in also a unique position considering sustainable and just transition. Sustainable management and management of environment and exploitation of resources is highly valued in all Nordics and something that we share. With all the good things I've mentioned so far, it's also to know that we are not doing so well on every aspect of sustainable development in the Nordics. For example, we are consuming way too much, and only 2 to 4% of resources used are ended back in the system, cycle back into the economy after use. So there is a lot of improvement to be made. We, of course, also have a very large carbon footprint in a world that has seen new records of emissions over the last years, every year. So there is a lot to do, and we need to improve on the area, but we also need to work even closer within the Nordic countries on collaborating and achieving even stronger or achieving more improvement, better results, and I think we also need to generate stronger tools for collaboration and governance of the collaboration we work together on. Yes, here is the vision, Nordic Council vision that was published by the Prime Ministers in 2019 of the Nordic countries to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. That is relatively soon, so as I mentioned, we have a lot to do. This vision stands on three pillars. That is the green Nordic region, a competitive Nordic region, and a socially sustainable Nordic region. I think, I mean, these of course go hand in hand. And for example, regarding the green Nordic region, there is a lot of need also in order for us to become more ecologically sustainable, to upskill and reskill a lot of people in our societies, and that is also, of course, one way of achieving the socially sustainable transition, that people are not left behind when sectors and fields of business are transforming into new ways of working. Yes, we have to reach this vision. We have formulated political programs for the last part of the vision era, 25 to 30, and that has been done in each of the ministerial sectors. We're not actually one ministerial council. We're 14 different ministerial councils, so 6 of them are at the Department of Growth and Climate. And yes, so contingency planning makes the Nordic region robust. So one of the, just something I want to bring out from here, that one of the themes that we have talked about very much in the Nordic context and has been raised very much in the Nordic context over the last few years has been that of resilience and how to build resilient societies. And that, of course, has also a lot to do with our built environment and our infrastructure and such, which is very much related to the construction sector. And of course, many of the other themes as well, but here sustainable resource management I was already referring to, and well, Nordic solutions at a general level, of course, very relevant here. But these themes are some of the headlines that stem from the 14 various programs and kind of joint factors for them. So as I mentioned earlier, sustainable resource management is one of the biggest challenges, and we have some of the highest consumption levels and carbon footprints in the world, and we need to do something about that. Reducing our region's climate footprint and making the economy more circular require systemic and innovative change by consumers, companies, and the public sector. And we at the Nordic Council of Ministers believe that we need to be working closely together between all the sectors of society, and we also have good example of results from when we do so. At the Nordic Council of Ministers, we will develop and improve our work on climate adaptation and support solution at the intersection of climate, biodiversity, and pollution, the triple planetary crisis. The construction sector is one of the key areas to address, and all this work will be accomplished. And all the work that has been accomplished in the Nordic sustainable construction has made already an important contribution to this agenda, together with the other initiatives around the agenda. We believe there's a clear need to continue this work, and the Nordic Ministers for Housing and Construction have identified the following areas for continuing the Nordic collaboration. And those are climate and how to reduce the impact on climate and environment, the circular economy that I've been referring to many times already, digitalization, how we can improve our systems so that they are more effective and ensure that we can share data across borders, and EU, and how EU impacts built environment and how we can have a joint Nordic influence over EU processes. And currently within the Nordic Council of Ministers, we are looking into how to continue this work more concretely within the environment and climate sectors and the business sector, amongst others. Yeah, so thank you to all for participating in this seminar today on the behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers as well, and also to all the participants in the programs up until now, and all the accomplishments that have been made in them. you have worked very efficiently and dedicatedly over the last 4 years, and that's something we are of course happy as program partner. And a lot of the accomplishments and results have brought people across the Nordic area together, and hopefully also fostering the future cooperation that we will be working on, amongst others, in some of the themes that have brought good results up until now. And those are the program has contributed to knowledge and sharing of experience on how to regulate climate impact from buildings through life cycle assessment, collaboration of tailored workshop to companies that wish to change their business model to more circular economy, and increase the debate about what constitutes sustainable material of design, and define and explore potential for emission-free construction sites, and also created free educational materials around all of these themes. So we are grateful for these results and hope that we can build further on them and continue with the good collaboration within the Nordics and bring good future results and increase our cooperation with the big challenges we stand ahead. Thank you.
Dan? Thank you very much, Dan, for those very motivating and rewarding words to many of us here in the room who have worked in different ways with this collaboration. Thank you. And now I would like actually to ask Sols Todd to come to the floor. Sols is a team lead for building in BPIE, Building Performance Institute of Europe. I think it's a really interesting building think tank. I often refer to them when I want to find out what's happening. And we were very happy you would come, because of course for us in the Nordic, it's really important we can accelerate our knowledge together, but we also want to give our input to Europe, but also learn from it. So Sols is actually here today to share some of his experience and BPIE's knowledge. So a warm applause to Sols. And please remember also, yeah, sorry, I did that twice. There will be time for questions in the end. So have them in mind, and please don't be shy. It's that one chance today. Round of applause to Sols. Please, Sols.
Thanks, Ala. That was great. Thank you. It's a huge burden, actually. If this is indeed representing Brussels, that's really a huge burden I have to carry. Anyways, great to see you all. A very warm afternoon also from my side. And let me get this straight out, because when Helle provided the invitation a couple of weeks ago, I was very, very quick replying positively to it, because it is exactly how she described it. We used to look up from Brussels quite a lot to what the Nordic Council has been doing. And it was a bit of a beacon for us when we looked at, okay, this is really inspirational. How can we replicate this across Europe? And I have to say, since then, we have been doing quite a few initiatives with other member states, trying to follow a bit what the Nordic Council attempted to do over the last couple of years. And I have to say that this model is actually working. It is something that can be translated across geographies, and something certainly to learn from. And great to see some familiar faces as well. So I'm really grateful to have the chance indeed, and hopefully there is maybe a way to reciprocate what we have learned from you. All right, so let me just quickly introduce myself and ourselves. BPIE, as it stands for the Building Performance Institute of Europe, it's an independent policy think tank, and we do our own research to provide the quantitative evidence base and qualitative evidence base for policymakers across Europe, so both EU level policymakers as well as national governments. And we work quite a lot also with the industry to build bridges and also build communities across these new and emerging topics, because it's also very often my impression that policymakers feel encouraged to move forward when they feel that there is enough support from the public, there is enough support from the industry. So we started off about 15 years ago, but obviously back in the day, the focus was very much and almost exclusively on operational energy performance. As we know, the energy performance of buildings directive was still quite fresh. But over the years, we have gradually extended the scope of our activities to include life cycle impacts. And now I think it has been already mentioned in the introduction, we are also looking at actually what is the distribution of the costs and benefits of the transformation of the building sector. And that's actually something I wanted to reflect on over the next couple of minutes. So here is what I suggest to do today. First, a bit of a preamble and a bit of a reminder of the fact that it's not just about the environment, or it's not just, we are not exclusively dealing with the climate crisis. But on the top of this, there is also a housing crisis. And then I would also want to give a bit of a personal story of how I got into this conversation and how the BPIE got actually to work or research a bit more on sufficiency and how to best use the existing building stock as a solution actually to reply sensibly to this multiple crises that we have. Then I will provide a bit of definition and interpretation of what sufficiency actually means for the building sector. And finally, I will provide some case studies which also look at the potential impacts and the way how this could be maybe replicated across Europe. And I will leave you just with some concluding thoughts and remarks. All right, so this is the preamble. This is really nothing of a breakthrough news. Last week, we have published a report, the European Building Climate Tracker, which is actually the European version of the global status report we do every year for the UN and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, but this exclusively focuses on the EU region. And again, there is really nothing new, but I feel like somebody always have to carry this sort of negative message. That obviously the building stock is not on track for decarbonization. And this year is I think is particularly relevant because we are somehow halfway through the milestone to 2030, starting off from when the Paris Agreement was concluded in 2015. And actually, as it will show, all the indicators which makes up this composite index are probably over 40% away from where they should be. So here are the indicators that we were looking into and were assessing. So you see here the carbon dioxide emissions, final energy consumption, the share of renewable energy, importantly also renovation investments, they are all a bit in the red. But there is also another message that we try to bring into this report this year, and this was the fact that actually the lack of the progress that we have on the environmental KPIs is also a risk that is actually impacting very much the people of Europe. So when we are talking about housing shortages, when we are talking about energy poverty, when we are talking about equity, is actually there are implications of what we do in this space. And that's again a message that has been highlighted and is being taken up in the new Commission mandate. And here some of you will recognize this space because for the first time we have a commissioner for energy and housing. And this is an exact response of the fact that there was a bit of a political backlash and there is a sort of Green Deal fatigue of all the new legislative push that came through for the last 5 years. So of course now the focus will be very much on the implementation of the next legislative cycle, and there will be no U-turn around this. We will continue pushing very much the environmental agenda, but I think importantly there is this recognition that house prices went up because construction prices went up, mortgage rates went up. There is a shortage of supply when it comes to housing. So all these, especially in European capitals, these are all brewing and these are all creating a real crisis. So there is a recognition that we need to add this issue. And in a way, addressing this issue has been presented in a way that there are conflicting objectives. So we have this sort of perceived trade-offs of, on one hand, addressing environmental objectives, and on the other hand, addressing the housing crisis. Because housing crisis, we have to avoid that this will be essentially a license to build very quickly cheap, low quality buildings, because as we know, as we learned, in new construction is very much a carbon hotspot when it comes to embodied carbon. So how do we realistically and in a way that makes sense combine these two? And that would be actually one of the key messages that I would like to articulate today is how to sort of respond to this multiple crisis that we are facing. Okay, so this is already the sort of introduction of how we got to work with avoid and demand reduction measures, and essentially the focus on the existing building stock. So I just go back a couple of years when we started working for the European Commission for an EU-wide whole-life carbon roadmap. And what we try to do here together with Ramboll and the KU Leuven, Catholic University of Leuven, was to sort of develop a baseline of where the building stock in Europe is, because this was essentially the basis for policymakers to know what is the starting point, to then build or design and put in place policies which are going to resolve the carbon footprint of the building stock. So we essentially built two scenarios. One was very much driven by technology solutions. So all the low carbon measures like material substitutions, improvements in terms of energy efficiency and material intensity use. And we modeled this separately. And I think one of the key messages was that it's simply not enough. Relying solely on technological improvements and measures will not get us anywhere meaningfully close to credible decarbonization pathway or climate neutrality of the EU building stock. So then we also try to look, and it's what you see here is the bottom line, the avoid. Essentially, we try to model a few, on the top of this, a few sufficiency or demand reduction measures, because as what you see here in the middle as well is that with the technology-driven model, the embodied carbon emissions were really stuck, and we couldn't really bring this down quite a lot. Energy efficiency improvements over the operational phase can be improved quite a lot, but there is something remaining which, in a way, makes a compelling case for avoid and reduction measures. And I think one interesting aspect that we did in this study was that we looked at the building stock. So, and I think this is something which is slightly different compared to a lot of the amazing work that the Nordic Council has done in terms of whole life carbon assessments, is that we didn't only look at the low carbon measures available at the individual building level. So we looked also at the European building stock level, and this is where actually beyond the carbon intensity of the materials, the construction, installation, transport, end-of-life treatment, beyond this, we also looked at the quantity or the volume of the materials which are being used in Europe. We also looked at the size of the stock, which is going to be heated or cooled, because these are, again, important carbon hotspots and important drivers, actually. So, excuse me. So once you have this building stock perspective, you also have a more comprehensive overview of what the potential levers are for decarbonization, and you start to look at ways to actually bring this down by the sufficiency policies that I'm going to talk about. So when we were consulting on this technical report and the draft roadmap with the industry, it was really encouraging the fact that there was quite a bit of support, and it may come as counterintuitive, but essentially there was an overwhelming support for sufficiency principles as highly impactful and highly feasible approaches to reducing building sector emissions. Thank you. And I think, again, when you look at avoid and demand reduction measures, they are very, very relevant because they impact right now. So basically, you are doing something which reduces carbon emissions right now. And also it buys us a bit of time before a lot of these new carbon, low carbon technologies become mature enough and are spread across markets. So it's important, it's an important lever and even more important today, and also as a means to avoid potential rebound effects. So again, there was quite a substantial support from the industry. And on top of this, we have been then asked, because it was sufficiency measures or avoid measures have been modeled in a very, I wouldn't say basic level, but we only took a few potential ways of how we could implement this in the model. So there was a requirement essentially to develop this work much further. So this is when we actually started looking into what sufficiency can mean in the built environment and what the potential impacts are. And so this is a forthcoming report. I can only show the front cover, but once this gets published, then the details are there. Right, so now talking about sufficiency, it's not necessarily a new term, but I think what is new and what is relevant for this conversation today is what does it mean actually applied to the building sector? It's a term which has been in use since the 1990s. It has been used especially in the space of energy efficiency. It was always presented as a complementary measure due especially to the persistent rebound effects that we had back in the time. Then there has been a few years ago, the ECEEE conferences had dedicated year actually focusing on sufficiency, but it was still very much, again, looked upon from this perspective of energy sufficiency. Very interestingly, Thailand had in the 1990s introduced this principle in their development strategy. I mean, it's really worthwhile to look up because it's very progressive for the day and also just from a country from the global south. But everything came really to the front light when the IPCC, the sixth assessment reports, included a definition of sufficiency in 2022, which looks something like this. So the focus is no longer a narrow one focusing on energy efficiency, but as you can see, it includes avoiding demand for energy, materials, land, water. So it includes also resources beyond energy. And then what you see here is actually we try to spell out what this means for the building sector. Now, this is a question that we very, very often get. What is actually the difference between efficiency and sufficiency? And I think one way of looking at this is that when we talk about or when we try to act upon efficiency, we are only acting upon the symptom of an environmental impact. And very often we look at the sort of incremental technological improvements. When we are talking about addressing waste in a sufficient manner, it's actually looking at the root cause. So, and it's no longer about the technological solutions. Another way of looking at the concept of sufficiency is that essentially to look at this from two different or two competing sort of needs or two competing ways of saying enough. Because you have the inner circle that is very much related, in the case of buildings, it's very much related to the right of having a safe place, having also a decent housing. And when we look, and this is what we don't have enough, this is where we have a shortfall. And then beyond that is what we have already too much and what we have to cut because we have an overshoot of the sort of environmental impacts. Okay, so coming back to this perceived trade-off or conflicts that we have in terms of the need to reduce all life carbon emissions from the building stock, and the other hand, the need for new housing and having a tight housing market in many EU countries. That's what actually prompted us to look at what is exactly the potential of what we are looking at. And this is based on Eurostat data. We have a staggering 34% of EU population which lives in under-occupied homes, while average office occupancy rate is around 57. So there's a huge potential of using or optimizing the use of the existing stock. And everything that we are talking about is in a way very much a common sense. And sufficiency can mean many different things, or can take many different forms when we apply it to the building sector. It can be even applied to new constructions. For instance, just to give an example, think about adaptability, think about future use. It's one way of preventing actually a building will have to be knocked down and replaced with another one. And I think a lot of this is common sense, but it yet is revolutionary simply because I think our economic models is just, and very often building regulations as well, make it so difficult to apply. When we look at the potential, I have to say, a lot of the existing research is actually based on potentially two countries, Germany and France, which are today probably the most advanced countries when it comes to applying sufficiency principles on the building stock. And these are two quite complex and quite comprehensive studies. What you see on the left side is a comprehensive study done by the Building Research Institute, the federal one in Germany. And they came to the conclusion that if we are able to harness unoccupied space, we will be basically able to replace new construction completely. This would save quite a lot of carbon emissions as well as building materials. On the other side, again, there was a quite optimistic outcome when it comes to sufficiency scenarios. Again, this makes a lot of sense if you compare to scenarios which actually do not take into account the sufficiency principles. So another interesting angle to look at this is that we always hear the narrative that when we talk about sufficiency, is something like self-sacrifice, is something that you have to give up. So it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. So living smaller, this has been an argument put forward in quite a few survey results, is that it doesn't always have to perceive this sort of trade-off or sacrifice of giving up. It can really increase well-being. Especially a lot of elderly people feel like, okay, I have too much. I simply, it's too difficult for me to manage this. And also very interestingly, this was a comprehensive study done on national energy and climate plans, which were consulted through the citizens' assemblies. And essentially, the outcome of this was that the public is ready. The public is ready for more than what politicians would assume. So these are a few case studies that we have actually looked into and assessed. And we have assessed them for the avoided floor area they can provide, as well as the avoided embodied emissions. But I think what I just wanted to talk about here is that these different initiatives have very different approaches, and there's a really large diversity of sufficiency approaches. I think we just need to be creative about this. So the first one, which is a completely voluntary initiative from Belgium, is about, so the name, it says one roof and two ages. It refers essentially to elderly people who have unoccupied space in their homes, and they give it out for young students who can live with them as a sort of intergenerational exchange. The other one is essentially a vacancy register, which is done in France. But this is really national level, which is amazing because it starts with data collection. It starts about identifying what buildings are actually prone to be transformed and reused and brought back into the housing market. And it all starts with mapping these and contacting the owners, and then also providing them with some sort of support, because very often these are buildings which are derelict, they are neglected, so they are in dire need of renovation. The third one is, so from one to make two, essentially, it's, again, when it comes to very large homes, is to be able to divide them and creating more building units. Poland is, this case is somewhat similar to France. The one in Ireland is a conversion of offices into housing units. So when we assess these case studies and we scale them up to the national level, we came to more or less a similar conclusion to the German studies I was referring to. So this is actually the annual level of construction required. And we had, when we scale them up, here on the left-hand side, you see essentially we could free up actually more space than is required to be built every year. And I think one very interesting outcome of this result was not just the quantitative assessment, but very much the qualitative assessment of what has been achieved with these sufficiency measures. Because none of these initiatives have been done or have been initiated with environmental considerations in mind. They have all been done with economic or social reasons, simply. And whole life carbon reductions were just simply a co-benefit. So I think this makes a really compelling case, a business case for doing this in the right way. And you see, there's really a diversity of positive impacts here, which have been achieved. So that leaves us a bit of a question for us is, do we essentially have the right metrics and the KPIs driving building regulations? To what extent, because sufficiency is really about providing according to the needs, how do we define the needs when it comes to construction? I don't have a good answer to this, but it's something that is probably for us collectively to think about and to take away with us. Another question, that sort of reflection I had, is that it's really a fundamental shift for the sector of how are we creating value from doing less? So it's again, probably I don't need to tell this to you because you are the enlightened community here, but it's very relevant, maybe in other parts of Europe, that is really so much, the sector is so much ingrained in this sort of paradigm of growth, of building. It's really a fundamental shift of how we are going to alter this perception that new is not always better, and there is actually value in maintaining cultural and historical assets. Okay, and finally, just a few recommendations of how sufficiency initiatives could be potentially looked at, and I only have 2 slides. There is again a plethora of potential initiatives. One of this is that making better use of vacant or under-occupied buildings. Essentially, data collection is the first and most important thing to start with. And I mentioned the case of France and Poland. Second, prioritizing the preservation, repurposing, reuse of the existing building stock. So a huge push coming just from Belgium. I've been recently talking to the head architect of Brussels, and they have been doing a lot of office conversions because not all the workers came back after the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of unused office space, which the city itself is looking into transforming into residential spaces. Incentives for more efficient use of space at both the building as well as neighborhood level. That's also another important point, that we can't just look at sufficiency principles at building level. It can be applied at neighborhood level, for instance, by looking at what sort of collective or common spaces we can create, and then looking at what's needed actually for privacy. There are again good examples which have been documented in this research. As I said, sufficiency principles can be applied also in new construction. Again, just thinking about the future uses and changing occupancy patterns. There is, I think, a need for a lot more experimentation when it comes to sufficiency initiatives. There is no exchange for the time being. There is no exchange of best practices. There is no evaluation of what works, that doesn't work, what are the key ingredients, what are the key success factors. So nobody actually looked at this in detail and have done a comprehensive assessment. Again, I think this is like great to have a compendium, to have like an inventory of how this could be taken stock and how this could be applied elsewhere as well. It's important to use synergies with other policy fields. I think that's important because a lot of the barriers to sufficiency is, again, not so much that people don't want it, but there are regulatory barriers. It's not about imposing people to have like a maximum floor area per capita. It's about, for those who want to make a change, to be able to do this. So that's a bit looking at what the current challenges are, for instance, in taxation or in transaction costs, mobility, and so on. And finally, I think, and I will leave you with this, because it's still somewhat a new field, we clearly need more qualitative and quantitative analysis. We need, again, this sort of menu book of what works, what doesn't work, to be able to have a proper guidebook for replication. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Sol, for a very interesting, quite specific presentation with some good inspiration I think we can bring with us. So now it's time for questions. So I hope you have, maybe it has sparked some ideas or questions in your minds. So your hand up and please say your name and where you're from and rise. Harry, please. Oh, please.
Yes, Harri Hakastelu, Minister of
Do you mind?
Finland.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, very interesting representation. We have also identified this issue of sufficiency, maybe with other words in Finland. But my question is, have you considered or have you any ideas how to integrate it into building regulation?
So that was another key question. Yeah, no, please take that one and then we give the microphone to Peter for afterwards. Please, Sols.
Yeah, can I? Yeah. So yeah, I think the very last slide was about the need to look at this not exclusively from the point of view of building regulations, because this could easily take the form of something like imposing a limit value of occupancy intensity and maximum floor area per capita, but this is not the way how we want to approach this. And I don't think also politically is just way too sensitive to put this forward. So I think my suggestion would be to look at this more from what other connecting regulations or legislative measures could essentially encourage a reduction of floor area use. When we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the European Commission, as they are also planning to just, first of all, they were trying to figure out what exactly their role at EU level would be in relation to sufficiency, which is even more difficult because I think a lot of the intervention measures are very local. As you saw, a lot of these initiatives were very local, and some of them were actually voluntarily or led by NGOs. So I think local level public authority interventions are more relevant, and everything starts with awareness raising. And this is probably where also the EU policymakers have a role of creating that sort of capacity to be able to assess what their existing building stock is and what their occupancy is. I think also we need a clear definition of what sufficiency and what, for instance, an unused or underoccupied building is. France has did it. It just did it, but I know that this doesn't exist in other countries.
Thank you for that feedback to the question. Looking across. Peter, please.
Thank you so much, Slot. My name is Peter Vængsbo. I'm from Arup. You started the presentation of really giving gratitude to the Nordic Sustainable Construction Program and all the achievements which have happened. So do you mind to just kind of elaborate a little bit about the 3 key topics which you believe could be adopted by the EU, us in the Nordic as a front runner around Nordic sustainable construction? What is your, top 3 topics that you could see could inspire the rest of Europe? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost is all the work done around harmonization when it comes to whole life carbon assessment and designing a performance-based building regulation around it. That's clearly something that is on the minds of the EU policymakers right now as they are clarifying the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. The delegated act, which will follow the Annex 3, is due end of next year. So there is actually quite busy work when it comes to how comprehensive will be the common EU framework for whole life carbon measurement, and then following from this, what sort of methodology will be applied to develop the national decarbonization pathways. And I think this was probably the most inspiring part, where I think everyone from Europe looks at the Nordics very much, because again, the model that you have developed is working and can be translated in other member states as well. And I think what was also very important is that this wasn't approached exclusively from a sort of prescriptive regulatory perspective, but it was I think you spent a lot of emphasis on providing the support measures as well and the industry engagement and the fact that you came to some sort of consensus through dialogue and exchange, and I think that's certainly a model that can be applied across Europe.
Thank you. That's a very good example. And then please.
Hello, I'm Harpa from Wild Aalborg University, Icelandic Dane. Thank you, Salt. It was really a pleasure to listen to your presentation, and I didn't know there would be so much sufficiency. So I'm really pleased to hear that there has been so much focus on that.
Pushing for it.
Yeah, but just to respond very quickly to this, how we can do it with regulation. I think it's building regulation can maybe not handle everything about the sufficiency. Of course, we've thought very much about it also here. This square meter, is it really helping us for sufficiency? So the building regulation alone cannot maybe do everything. But it's maybe a little bit unfair to ask you, because in a way, my question came when we had the first introduction from the Nordic Council of Ministers, where I didn't know there would come so much focus on sufficiency. But there we have the climate and growth. And we had 3 pillars also. What was it? Competitive or things. So of course we need to focus on that. But if the Nordic countries still want to be a lighthouse, thinking about something ahead, well, how can we be some kind of also some front runners in sustainability within this area? Then we need also really to focus on how we are going to deal with sufficiency. So my question came, so it's not, I don't know, I cannot put you, but maybe you can help us in inspiring the Nordic Council of Ministers, how we could really also take some, I don't know, co-lead together with others on how to deal with sufficiency, because you showed it with the numbers. It's not possible without.
I think
not an easy one, but please.
Sure. Sufficiency is the solutions for all problems of the world. It is. It's not just an irony, but I think what makes this conversation particularly relevant today in this context of the Nordic collaboration is that the fact that how far we can push whole life carbon limit values, which again, I was just replying to this question that I think were really effective. And it's something that we still have to be implemented in other parts of Europe. But at a certain point, you know, you ask the question, okay, what's next? And how to align with climate neutrality objectives in a credible and meaningful way, because it's just simply not enough. I think again the key issue is that how we define needs when it comes to the built environment. And I think this is maybe a key question for architects as well. It's not just for a think tank alone. I think they are very much in the interface between the demand for housing, for occupants, for tenants, as well as the supply side, the construction sector. So I think there is maybe some sort of dialogue or conversation will need to take place in there as well. Sort of just eye-opening or awareness raising and questioning really what the need would be for future uses. I think there is still a lot of also there are, I think, trade-offs as well. Sufficiency is, it cannot be perceived exclusively like limiting the volume of our buildings, because it's not just the floor area. It's ultimately about the volume that we are heating and cooling and we are building up as well. And if you limit them to a certain point, there are trade-offs like, well, if you look at buildings which have been really there for like 200 years and have witnessed different uses and time, basically, they are not necessarily the small ones. So I think there are interesting conversations probably to have with the architects about what is the most needed. Yeah.
Thank you for trying to give a feedback to the board question. I guess you at least served a lot of opportunities and a lot of things to look inspiration from, and then maybe we gather together and see what we can do depending on the future. Please, last question.
Okay. Mikko from Finland. Mikko Somerhalmi representing the Finnish building owners and construction clients. This is not an easy question either, or maybe a thought. This efficiency and sufficiency is not so easy in growing cities, as you know. How to compare efficiency of a building to a city level, so that you are not resulting into a situation where you are optimizing the building, but that results to new buildings built in new areas in growing cities. So it's just a question about the reports you have done. We have also had a lot of talks and researches related to building conversions from one usage to another usage, which is a good way. And very efficient way when you think about the carbon emissions. But do these researches link like the city efficiency and the building efficiency? That would be like a useful in decision making. And of course, cities are in different situations. Some are growing, some are growing rapidly, some are stagnating, and in some cities even the population is decreasing. So you would have to look at these metrics differently in different cities and like linking the city's sufficiency to the building sufficiency.
Yeah, great question. So if you look, I think making these sort of distinctions is very, very important for a number of reasons. Because so if you look at exclusively from very high above, exclusively from the level of like the continent, and you look at the existing building stock, the existing floor area, and you just compare this to demographic projections of demographic growth, which is actually negative when it comes to the continent, it's easy to make the conclusion that, oh, well, we have enough. we just basically we don't even need to build. Some buildings will come up for like renovations, or indeed will have to be replaced because of various reasons. But I think the situation is just simply much more nuanced and much more sophisticated. But this is exactly what we are required to do, because our existing building models, for instance, which have been developed with energy efficiency and operational purposes in mind, they do not take into account, they do not couple this sort of demographic development. We can't really understand why a building comes up for a demolition, of why we build, where we build. These are important questions that we can only answer when we couple these various data sets and understand. We have a bit more dynamic understanding of our building stock. Now, when you were talking about city level, I think it's very important to look at not just building sufficiency when it applies to individual buildings, but also what the impact of the building is on the surrounding infrastructure in terms of like mobility, utilities, all these things. And some of the examples that I have presented have actually been created of this need of like rejuvenating parts of the cities. And city developers, they looked at sufficiency as a potential solution to make this place again attractive, because very often the problem with what we have with buildings is that, and the fact that there is housing demand in usually concentrating in some European capitals, like probably Copenhagen as well, Paris and Rome and so on, is that everybody wants to be there because this is where the economic opportunities are, right? So you have to work with this as well. It's not as easy where you have like an oversupply of the stock in a rural area in Eastern Europe. You can't just take a building apart and move it to Western European capitals. So actually you have to work around this of understanding of why you have depopulation in certain parts of the continent. Yeah, so it's not as easy.
Thank you for the elaboration on that consideration. So this was the final part. I think we should give another round of applause for Sols. Thank you very much, Sol, for coming and sharing your insights with us, and also the new commissioner. And there are several new commissioners, very interesting. So you can always ask more questions, because now it is actually a time for coffee. I don't know, we have tea, but coffee break, and we have found some Christmas-ish snacks. And to you following online, thank you very much for being there. We can't all be here physically, so thank you for joining, and I hope you have something nice in the break. So we'll meet again 2:30 and here. And please remember, meet someone you maybe don't know as much, or use that opportunity. Thank you.